I've spent the past 7 years traveling the world perfecting my craft. You see, I'm something of a magician, inventor, and chocolate maker. So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that, reverse it.
Sometimes I imagine the perspectives of the grandparents in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Bedbound for like 20 years, living in abject poverty, and having their literally starving grandchild come to them one day and let them know that the highly wealthy entrepreneur who lives just opposite the slums that they live in, how he's offering this lifetime supply of luxury goods in return for this lottery that involves buying as much of his chocolate as you can. Just thinking to themselves, wow, we really do live in a dystopian world. And then I think, f*** those grandparents. And specifically, f*** Grandpa Joe.
Maybe if the floor wasn't so cold.
From now on, I'm going to pay for your tobacco.
Yeah, yes, I am back in the attic because it's where the audio sounds the best. Fuck off. I think a lot about the performance of Gene Wilder in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film. A performance that's easy to write off because it is this sort of whimsical cartoon family character, this silly children's book role, but I think there's depth there.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
There is like a real sense in my mind that Gene Wilder looked at the material and he was like, okay, who is this Willy Wonka guy? Who is this guy who is, on the one hand, this almost childlike creative mind, this very fanciful, out of this world kind of person, but then someone who's also very much a kind of a callous misanthrope.
My chocolate! My beautiful chocolate!
Don't just stand there, do something!
Help. Police. Murder.
Stop, don't come back. Stop, don't.
He can't swim!
There's no better time to learn.
Someone who is very detached, someone who has literally cut himself off from almost every person in his life. The kind of person that would fire thousands of his employees just to make sure that, you know, his personal ideas and secrets aren't revealed. Really this character of contrast, all this showmanship and spectacle, and even this sort of charitable spirit underneath, but also this sort of cruelty and detachedness from the world. And the whole time, it's just, is he just fucking with them?
I assume there's an accident indemnity clause.
Never between friends.
Is this all just a joke to him? It simultaneously adds to the whimsy and the dark elements of the film that you are never quite sure when you're being messed with by Wonka.
I said, I'd like to come out with a cane and be crippled. And I said, because no one will know from that time on whether I'm lying or telling the truth. And he said, you mean if we don't do that, you won't do the part? I said, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because it was a tricky part. But that element of who knows, is he lying or is he telling the truth, was what my main motor was.
There is probably no performance I've ever seen that matches his speech while they're going down on the boat.
Rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing.
It's kind of fantastical, but also kind of a creep. And, you know, the Johnny Depp version, very much a similar kind of game that's being played.
I shake you warmly by the hand.
Maybe with like an added touch of innocence. Did I just say innocent and Johnny Depp in the same sentence? But also way layering on the creep factor of the character.
Moms and dads. Dad?
Kind of like his version of a different character I feel like I saw before.
To do that with Johnny Depp, who I think is a good actor, and I like him. But I don't care for that director.
But that to me is Wonka. Detached, callous, but also filled with childlike wonder, a man of constant contradiction. The funny thing is that despite all this, a lot of people still disliked this version of the story, and especially Wilder's version of the performance, including Roald Dahl himself, who did find it to be too sort of sappy and saccharine. A version that was too cleaned up compared to how he would like the story to have been represented. Now, if I were to think of a film version of Wonka that was like that, I definitely would not think of Wilder's performance in that original film. I guess I would imagine something kind of like this.
Who's for Humberchuck? My name is Willy Wonka.
Every good thing in this world started with a dream.
Here we go, Mama.
Yes, there is now a modern prequel, remake, reimagining of Willy Wonka, because this is what all mass media is now. And there's been a mix of reactions. Some people are excited to see the new movie, but there's definitely been a large amount of negativity generated, and a lot of that negativity has been directed specifically at young Timmy Chalamet. A lot of people were unhappy on finding out that Timothée Chalamet didn't even have to audition for this role.
Over the last few years, there's been a heightened focus on nepotism and privilege in the entertainment industry. So hearing that an actor who just had his big career-changing role in 2017 hasn't had to audition for anything since can raise questions about privilege and accessibility.
I don't think that actors necessarily need to audition for roles if they've shown they can play similar roles in the past. But with Timothée Chalamet, that's kind of the problem, because people have never really seen him play a character like Wonka before. Now, the interesting thing about this mix of whimsy and darkness is that we kind of have seen Timothée Chalamet play at least the dark side of that character. If you look at like Call Me By Your Name or Dune, you will see shades of that, but it's almost played in the opposite way than you would imagine a character like Wonka. Paul Atreides is very reserved and bottled up, while by contrast Willy Wonka is like all showmanship. He's all spectacle and performance. And the funny thing is that in terms of the actual performance that people have seen so far, it seems like Timothée Chalamet has gone full whimsy. There's a real whimsy overload to the vibe of the whole thing. And as we all know, you should never go full whimsy. Now, he was not the first person considered for the role. At one point it was going to be Tom Holland, which maybe. It was going to be Donald Glover, which it was going to be Ryan Gosling, probably would have been the best choice. And at what point it was going to be Ezra Miller. So at least we know that no matter what, there were darker universes than this one. Some people have compared this performance to like an SNL skit of Willy Wonka. Personally, I think if they wanted to go full whimsy with this, they should have just gone ahead and made a movie adaptation of the sequel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book that no one ever talks about, where Charlie and Willy Wonka go to a hotel in space and help the president fight some shape-shifting aliens. And then Willy Wonka gives a magic potion to Charlie's grandparents to turn them all into babies. I'm sorry for unlocking some primal memories there. It remains to be seen what the movie will really be, but in terms of this depiction of the character, I think it is in some ways misguided that people are focusing all of their negativity onto Chalamet's performance itself. What I see Chalamet's performance as is a kind of symptom of a deeper problem with what this film seems like it's gonna be. This whitewashed, cleaned up version of this story that had potentially interesting facets to it that are now being rewritten in the name of a story that we have all seen many, many times before.
You could change her life, Mr. Wonka. Change all their lives.
There is one question that has always plagued mankind when it comes to conversations about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Willy Wonka. What about the Oompa Loompas?
What about the Oompa Loompas?
I think that if they're going to take this film seriously, Hugh Grant should be in blackface. That's the logical conclusion of Hugh Grant Oompa Loompa.
In the new film, they are fancy British men played by Hugh Grant.
I will have you know that I am a perfectly respectable size for an Oompa Loompa.
In the original version of the film, they were little orange men with green hair, imported from a fictional jungle.
I said, come and live with me in peace and safety, away from all the wang-doodles and hornswogglers and snozwangers.
And in the original version of the novel, they were literally African slaves who live off of caterpillars and are paid in chocolate bars, who walk around in grass skirts and deerskin pelts. I'm going to really blow people's minds here and be the absolute first person to point out that the dynamic here seems questionable. This is the thing about Willy Wonka as an archetype, is that I feel like in many ways he is the rawest depiction of the contradictions of capitalism. The rawest depiction of the contradictions of capitalism. That this duality of whimsy and darkness that I talked about before isn't just a fun quirk of the character, but very fundamental to the thing that he is representing. Fundamental to the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Again, even Roald Dahl himself felt that Wilder's version of Willy Wonka lacked enough of that sort of nuance and darkness to him, and lacked this certain sort of Britishness. The reason that his vote, as far as the performance goes, was for Spike Milligan, an English comedian, for most of the film's pre-production. And skimming through the book again, I can kind of see the point that he's making. On some level, you can read all of the horrible things that happen in the factory, and the horrible ways that Willy Wonka behaves, and all of the praise he gets from everyone around him, and f***ing Grandpa Joe.
They're all crazy.
The man's a genius.
The man was a genius.
The most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary.
The journey's over. Finest bath I've had in 20 years.
And beyond this surface level, there is this wry British sarcasm to the entire story. It does function as a kind of parody of a certain figure in capitalism.
Violet, you first. Sign here.
On some level, the whole thing functions as a joke about the kind of character that Willy Wonka represents in the story. And even and especially at the time it was written, it wasn't like there wasn't shade being thrown at this kind of big factory owner entrepreneur. And I think that's an element there. Wonka as this guy who has put thousands upon thousands of people in his own local community into abject poverty, making it so that this man who has control of the largest chocolate factory in the world lives in a place surrounded by slums because he's so concerned about his IP being breached, because he's so concerned about people making cheap knockoffs of his own products, something that, to be clear, has nothing to do with creative ambition and everything to do with maintaining market dominance. This man is a capitalist, but on the other hand, he's also a dream maker. He is this person of incredible ambition and creativity, looking to turn the things that he creates into this mass-produced global reality. On some level, I do think you are supposed to admire the spirit of it and the potential, and there's even explicit efforts to show that Willy Wonka wants to take his work and turn it into something that benefits the people around him, something that actually benefits the less fortunate.
That's right. For children with very little pocket money, you can suck them forever.
He wants to make everlasting gobstoppers so a kid can have one candy that lasts them forever. He wants to make bubble gum that satisfies you as much as a 3-course meal. Also, even in those concepts, you can kind of see that he has this certain level of detachedness between material reality and market spectacle. Chewing gum isn't actually going to satisfy someone as much as a 3-course meal. A lifetime supply of candy still isn't actually going to help the impoverished. It's the definition of a luxury item made specifically to induce consumption. In the same way people might think of state authoritarianism and then their mind goes to Big Brother, Wonka is a parody of the contradictions of capital. The man who gives people what they want at the expense of the things they actually need. So there's two sides to this, both of which I think are totally ripe to be explored, and both of which I think are pretty relevant to the modern day.
Mr. Wonka, can you send other things? Not just chocolate, I mean.
Anything you like.
What about people?
People? Suppose I could? Yes, I'm sure I could. I'm pretty sure I could.
callous individualist who is ignorant of how everything he has done was off the backs of thousands of other workers, someone who far overestimates his own abilities and importance, and who it is very apparent maintains success not through his understanding of people, but his total detachment to people, in favour of shallow ploys and big ideas in a market with a vague grasp of how those ideas meet with reality. Someone who cares more about maintaining his brand than any of the people he needs to exploit or destroy to get there. I wonder who I'm talking about right now.
There is one idea you have that we've discussed before, which is Hyperloop. And
right.
I would love for you to tell this audience what that is and how it could change our world again. Thank you.
Yeah. I would actually love to answer that question, but if I do, that will be the news tomorrow.
Elon Musk is possibly the greatest living inventor.
Let's imagine a version of the Wonka story that doesn't shy away from the more controversial elements of him as a character, a version that actually leans more into what he was in the first place, as a comedic spin on like a mega-rich industrialist. A misanthrope with a hugely overinflated ego who happily credits himself as an amazing inventor and philanthropist, while it becomes increasingly obvious that all of his work is actually the product of many, many throwaway employees, and all his ideas and charitable inventions are actually just blatant market spin that might excite a shareholder meeting, but in reality are either completely unworkable or actively harmful to actual people.
Always goes wrong when we come to the dessert. It happens every time. They all become blueberries.
The kind of character that doesn't just exist to propagate how the market rewards spirit and ambition, but highlights that market's utter absurdity.
Lickable wallpaper for nursery walls.
The thing about this is that it is already so incredibly close to exactly how the character was originally depicted.
Fantastic invention. Revolutionized the industry. You can suck them and suck them and suck them, and they'll never get any smaller. Never. At least I don't think they do. A few more tests.
While also seeming like a perfect parody of certain extremely relevant modern billionaire industrialists, whose ideas are also basically all unworkable nonsense, whose attempts at charity only cause him to make even more of an arse of himself.
It wouldn't have made the first 50 metres into the cave, just a PR stunt, and stick his submarine where it hurts.
And whose fortune was also built on the exploitation of workers in Africa.
Wow, Elon, you're like Willy Wonka without the underpaid munchkin. Without the underpaid munchkin. Without the underpaid munchkin. Without the underpaid munchkin.
Elon Wonka, starring Jeremy Allen White. We've all seen the Tony Stark story told a million times before. The genius, philanthropist, entrepreneur. The incredible billionaire, inventor, industrialist. The solo genius who's just such a special mind that they've risen to the top of society.
Hey, good idea for an electric jet. You do.
Yeah. And even with Tony Stark, I think you can see stories that kind of reflect this growing audience skepticism towards this sort of character. How many Iron Man stories do you need that are about Tony realizing that he isn't as infallible as he thinks he is? How many do you need about how there's these other people that are unhappy because it turns out that either Tony or someone in his family just straight up stole from and profited from their own work? But obviously we know that in the end they have to be the villains of the story. You can just do the exact same thing that Cruella did. Transplant all of the edge of the character onto these generic mustache-twirling villains who they can then defeat. Maybe they can even toss in a thing where it turns out that Wonka is like the rightful heir to the chocolate empire or something, so that we can know for sure that legally they're allowed to be the good guy. Just really boil it down so we can just have a nice, simple story about an amazing, brilliant genius who wins in the market through their sheer creativity and ambition. Or you can just do the Oz the Great and Powerful thing, and you can... I'm actually not really sure what Oz the Great and Powerful was supposed to be about. Other than in making Oz this sort of creepy, manipulative womanizer just to give James Franco the easiest acting job in his life. I would really like it if someone were to check the text between James Franco and that porcelain doll child. I love how that movie doesn't even try to come up with a reason to think that this is like a good person. So instead it's just a bunch of characters telling him that he's a good person. I guess in the end we're supposed to root for him because it turns out the villain is another woman that he took advantage of. I like the Zap Braff monkey. Aesthetically, it reminds me a lot of a different... What was I talking about? Now, the musky Wonka path is one that would maybe a little bit predictable and not necessarily the only one that can be gone down. And I do think there's another just as interesting, maybe arguably more relevant path for them to go down that could also potentially explore some interesting facets of that character and that story in a way that would fit with the modern day and would also have a connection to another figure in popular culture who I'm sure at this point we're all quite familiar with. Let's imagine a version of the Wonka story more tuned to the modern day, not rooted in nostalgic fables about how back in the good old days all the corruption and exploitation was ended, but more focused on how a person like Wonka might find success post-influencer era. Like, as an influencer. I mean, Wonka's success was already built on the chocolate industry equivalent of clickbait. Lean into that. Tell a story about someone rising to success as someone who isn't necessarily a greedy or malicious person, but understands engagement well enough to know that the best way to success is by big showy headlines, even if they might be a bit naive or bend the truth of the work actually being done. Who can then be faced with the struggles and limitations of that kind of success, of the limitations of charitable work in that context, of the inherent frivolousness of a career like this and the alienation it can lead to. A version of Wonka that would both be an interesting commentary of a type of career many kids today are drawn to, and once again, still not that far from the original idea of the character. To the point where, as a deliberate spectacle, a lot of his work and inventions actually make more sense.
I recreated Willy Wonka's chocolate factory in real life, and one of these 10 people is gonna walk away with this chocolate factory.
I propose Wonka Mr. Beast, starring Daniel Radcliffe. There is no getting around this. Mr. Beast is Zuma Willy Wonka.
I'm going to give you $10,000.
Stop winning.
No.
Dream maker and entrepreneur, always coming up with some new fantastical idea that's going to simultaneously make the world a better place and also happens to be a giant content spectacle that just keeps pushing that amazing, brilliant smile deeper and deeper and deeper into the crevices of our minds. This is one of the things that makes me sad that this movie is gonna just do the Edwardian, early 1900s, wishy-washy, old-timey aesthetic that just makes it look like a Fantastic Beasts sequel. Because I could absolutely see a version of this character that totally works in the modern day with the modern philanthropy influencer and the complicated feelings that a lot of people have with them. By all accounts, Mr. Beast does not seem like a bad guy at all. Please discount this segment if he is cancelled. And he has made efforts to use his platform for positive causes. In the same way, Wonka as a character is not typically just a villain. He's just complicated because he is both a market spectacle driven symptom of a larger problem and also just a person who's probably genuinely trying to make the world a better place. This is the trouble I think people often have with the idea of philanthropy and charity by the highly successful. That these are usually good things being done with good intentions that also happen to be representative of a much larger bad thing. The idea that the deeply impoverished will end up relying on the charity of these extremely successful people for things like clean water and housing and vision, and that to facilitate this they'll even be turned into content, and how when you really think about it, that's kind of a depressing reality. In the same way it might be kind of depressing to think that it's uplifting to imagine a child getting a lifetime supply of food in return for buying as much chocolate as they can from the man who helped turn his home into a slum. And there's two sides to it, because yeah, a man who makes chocolate shouldn't really be responsible for whether thousands of people live in poverty, just like how a YouTube influencer probably shouldn't really be responsible for whether a town in Kenya has clean water. There's a story from the Roald Dahl original book that was adapted in the Johnny Depp Tim Burton version, but not the original film, about a man who wants to make a palace out of chocolate. And Wonka, in all his creative ambition, is more than happy to facilitate this, make him a chocolate palace, but obviously tells him, you're gonna need to eat this chocolate, this is not gonna last.
I will not eat my palace. I intend to live in it.
Man doesn't want to get rid of his palace of chocolate. And obviously the palace melts, because you can't build a foundation out of chocolate.
The guilty ones, now this is sad. Dear old mom and loving dad.
Themes of personal responsibility versus the conditions that we're forced into are already there in the original book.
You know exactly who's to blame. The mother and the father.
After all, so much of it is just a morality tale about punishing kids for being bad eggs and then rewarding the good children. I think all of this represents the kind of complicated perspective you could explore through a character like Wonka, and it's not really something we've necessarily seen before. What is the role of these extremely powerful, successful people in their limitations, but also the immense status that they hold? All the complicated feelings that people have for that type of person. Individuals who are not necessarily bad people with bad intentions, but do end up symbolizing a very bad part of our reality. Speaking of very bad parts of our reality, there is a trait in the Jewish character that does provoke animosity. Maybe it's a kind of lack of generosity towards non-Jews. I mean, there's always a reason why anti-anything crops up anywhere. Even a stinker like Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason. You know, when I think of words I would use to describe Adolf Hitler, there are some words that have never really come to mind. Do you think Hitler was a stinker?
So recreate that. No, I don't. No, I'll say yes.
Now look, I'm gonna let you in on a very precious secret to me. When I was a child, I liked the books of Roald Dahl. I liked The Twits, I liked James and the Giant Peach, I liked the BFG, even though that scene in the movie scarred me deeply and forever, and I liked Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. F me, Roald. Even if this movie was the most whitewashed, cleaned up, sappy, saccharine depiction of the whole Willy Wonka mythos, it would still not be the first time that Roald Dahl's work has been whitewashed in history. Again, actual African slaves. And over the years, Dahl's books have seen these little tweaks and revisions, some of which I think are maybe a little bit misguided given the context of the revision. At the end of the day, Roald Dahl was a millionaire trust fund kid, and he was a bigot, and at this point, the museum dedicated to him has condemned his past words. His own family has apologized on his behalf. I would honestly love to see a Roald Dahl defender in my comment section, and I cannot wait to see your essay-length comment about how wrong I am and cucked and beta and woke before I delete the entire thing without reading it. So this is definitely not a thing about adaptations respecting the sanctity of the original author's intentions and maybe adapting the stories that they've written in ways that don't necessarily have all of the baggage of the original thing. What I don't like seeing is when that baggage is stripped out of the work, when arguably that baggage is the most interesting commentary of the entire thing. And especially not when that baggage gets stripped out in favor of the same Hollywoodified saccharine story about how someone beat out the free market through their just pure individual creative spirit. A story that is far more fair than the reality of the one that we actually live in. One that has fed a lot of misguided views on people that I hope at this point is well understood are not the creative geniuses that they were once portrayed as. Again, very hard to read Grandpa Joe just constantly fondling the balls of Willy Wonka and not imagine a blue checkmark Twitter account. And no, I'm not calling it the other thing. I don't really care about being faithful to Dahl's original story, and I don't even really agree with his past takes on other adaptations of his work. Ultimately, it is in the nature of art to be taken and reinterpreted by other artists, or sampled or inspire other work. This is kind of just how art develops. But you at least want to see the thing reinterpreted as something other than the same misguided, tired, cliche story that we've seen so many times before. The kind of cliche that in many ways was already being parodied by the original work. And I'm not saying it's impossible that we get this from this new movie. It is directed by Paul King, who did Paddington, that did manage to take this beloved childhood character and turn it into this sort of interesting perspective on illegal immigrants and the struggles that they have to go through. At the same time, I also saw that video of Paddington having tea with the Queen.
Happy Jubilee, man. And thank you.
So I can kind of see how it could end up being co-opted by the exact powers that are otherwise being criticised. And on top of everything else, I think that giraffe looks fake. At a time of mass worker unrest, strikes, protests, unionizing efforts, I cannot think of a better time to take a story like this and reinterpret it in a way that explores these ideas that I've just been talking about. To take this character of contrasts and contradictions and use them as a vessel to explore a system that I think at this point people have very complicated feelings about. And I know I'm overthinking this because that is the brand of the channel, and a lot of people just don't like it because they think that Timmy's performance seems a bit cringe. But I do think that the reasons it might come off as a bit cringe do go a bit deeper than the performance of young Timmy himself, and that maybe we should stop just throwing all of this negative energy at Timmy. Ultimately, the vibe of the era is just decidedly not one where we all stand in awe of these 1%ers who have just earned their amazing positions in the market through sheer genius and graft, ignorant of the thousands upon thousands behind them that have done all of the work that has allowed them to reach the position that they are in. The people that not only end up forming the production base, but as it turns out, usually also the ideas and inventions themselves, who are then taken advantage of and forgotten about, thrown away like so many Oompa Loompas. Even within Hollywood, this is not the vibe. The first visual effects union might be about to happen, and as someone who has already talked about that industry and how terrible it is in past videos, I think that's incredibly exciting. And I do think in an age where Barbie is out there making $1 billion, this would be a good opportunity to take a story like Wonka, examine some facets of it that maybe haven't been looked at as closely before, and then produce something that is both a fun, enjoyable family film that also has some commentary to it, some relevant commentary to the current world that we actually live in. Rather than this constant Disney-fied nostalgic narrative looking back at this tired cliche that no longer has any resemblance to any reality that we live in. On the other hand, what I do think all of this recent action shows is that at the end of the day, media representation is only going to do so much. There's always going to be these protests and union efforts that actually create the change that benefits working people. At this point, I have talked many times on this channel about corporations co-opting their own criticism and then profiting off of, benefiting from the exact thing that's talking about how bad they are. That this is never going to lead to revolutionary content because there is no revolutionary content. Once again, you can give people as much chocolate as you want. They cannot use it to build a palace. And that's why I've decided that from now on, I'm not going to be using my channel to create more frivolous media critique content that ends up just serving a company that I'm already highly skeptical of and that I guess is just now promoting deepfakes of teenage celebrities. That's why from now on I'm going to be dedicating my channel to the things that really matter, to activism, to the promotion of real causes that really benefit people so that we can create the change that Thank you all as always for watching. If you like the video, please like, share it, subscribe. YouTube ad revenue sucks and this video is unsponsored, so if you would like to support the channel, throw us a buck or two. We have links to the Patreon or the Ko-fi. I do actually still think that there is some value in media that can kind of promote thought in different areas that you might not necessarily be inspired to think about through just like sermons or directions or whatever. And I am actually probably going to do a video about the thing. I've also been playing a lot of Slay the Spire recently, and it's very good. I've also been playing a lot of The Evil Within, and I don't think that that was very good.
Little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men.